So now we are at a point with our tote bag where we have our two bottom seams sewn. So this is my lining and facing piece, and the bottom is joined with a 1/2 inch straight seam here. And then I have my shell piece here, and the bottom of the two shells are joined here. What I am going to do is press my seams open with the iron. Okay, so if you have not done so already, they will both get pressed very cleanly on that stitch line, just like this. So the seam allowance should be touching either side, right? Completely open. So I'll go ahead and do that. What I am also going to do is measure my side seam from that stitch line. So depending on the width of the base that you want, we are going to take away a little bit of the height of the bag by taking it out of the side seam to create a base. So I'll kind of demonstrate. I am going to go ahead and mark up 1.5 inches on either side. And I'll just kind of do this. And from the stitch line, I'm going to make a mark right at 1.5 inches. I'm going to use the exact same measurement, and so I'm going to start from that point and stitch all the way up to the top of my tote bag. Okay, so that'll be the facing, and on the shell, it'll be the open side. So I'm gonna switch sides, do the exact same thing on the other side. So marking again 1.5 inches right in that seam allowance so that it doesn't get in the on the fabric of the actual bag. It'll be in the seam allowance. So I'll do this, repeat this step again with the shell. And so when we do sew this, it'll be easiest to just, I'm flipping the pieces over and like marking it on opposite sides. I'm doing that because when I am sewing, it'll be easier to sew from the part that's already attached rather than from the open side and try to make sure it matches here. You might have like some like openness or a little bit of gathering, etc. So it'll be easier to always start from the bottom and sew towards the top, towards the side that's open. When I do this, I'll show you briefly what it will look like, is I'm going to stitch this side seam up and it'll create a little open pocket here. And when I do that, I will have, let's see, about a 1 inch, maybe 1.25 inches base to my bag. So this is pretty narrow. If you want to make it 2 inches, that'll take 2 inches out of the top of the bag, by all means. So this will be a really small, narrow base. It is still enough for, say, like a laptop, a book, etc. So it really depends on like the shape that you want. You can follow along and just see what I do and how it turns out, and then decide from there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew my side seams, and then our next step will be creating that T-shape base. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my machine on. If you want to pin the tote bag together while you sew the side seams, by all means, remember to insert the pins perpendicular to the seam. That will keep them from sliding around. It'll keep your fabric level. So just like this, just spaced out pretty evenly. And then, like I said, it'll be easiest to control the stitch line if you start by sewing closer to the closed edge rather than the opening of the bag. So to sew our side seam, I'm going to line up my seam allowance at the 1/2 inch line, and I'm going to start by sewing, stitching and back stitching at that notch I made. and I'm sewing all the way to the edge. So stitch and back stitch right at the edge of our seam allowance. Okay, so I will flip it over. My notch is on the other side to help me by sewing again closer to the bottom of the bag. Just like so. So when you stitch, make sure you stitch all the way through the seam allowance. We want that closed up at the very top. The bottom, again, is open. So it's formed this kind of pocket opening. We'll close that up in our next set, but I'm going to keep stitching. So you'll have 4 side seams total to stitch. When you are stitching the lining and the facing, the seam allowance for the facing and where it's joined with the lining will already be pressed up towards the facing thanks to our understitching, so you'll want to keep it in that direction. My 4 seams are sewn. I will take these pieces to my iron. Again, I want all of my seams pressed open. So I'll open up my side seams for both the lining pieces as well as the shell. And I'll put this on the nose of my iron and really open it so that it's fully pressed, really clean. It'll look great from the inside and the outside if I do it, okay? So I'll come back with those very cleanly pressed.